Okay, so the title this morning is Think on These Things. And I want to start out with two stories that are going to seem unrelated, but I'll tie them together. Does anybody here remember what they were doing the night of January the 30th of this year? Kind of a trick question. Well, I remember what I was doing, and I'll tell you about it. I've always loved old classic cars, especially from the 40s and 50s and partway through the 60s. So I got on YouTube that night, the night of January the 30th, and how many of you know that Cuba has a lot of really cool old cars from the 40s and 50s? Okay, so anyway, I got on YouTube and I clicked on old cars in Havana or something like that. And you know, they've got such cool looking old cars, and a lot of them they use for taxis. And a lot of them some of them look not so good, but some of them look better than brand new. They've really kept them up. And the reason that they have all these old cars, as you may know, is when Castro came to power, they were not able to buy U.S. cars any longer. So they've just had to fix them and make do with what they had. And unless they can buy them from Russia or I don't know where all, maybe most anywhere, but they could not, from that point on, they could not buy new cars. So that's why they have all these really cool old cars. And so I watched it a little bit. This was showing cars in Havana. And they've got cool, like 1958 or 59 Cadillac convertibles you can rent for a taxi, and they'll cart you around the city, all kind of old cool cars. But then the more I watched, then I came to realize what a disaster the city of Havana is. And Havana used to be a really neat city that would rival really nice cities in Europe. They have all this fine architecture and these big buildings, but you see them now and they're just crumbling in, they're just falling down. And there's piles of trash like as long as this building all along the streets. And it's not a very pretty picture. You can get on YouTube and just click on the real Havana and you'll learn a lot. So what I'm telling you is what I learned on YouTube. So you know, you can check it out. Some of it might not be correct, but I'm pretty sure it is because I watched a good number of videos and they all say the same thing. Some of the things I learned is the average, let me make sure we got the right figure here. Okay, everything is owned by the government. The average income, anybody want to guess what the average income per month is? $15. And if you go to the store to buy something, it's not like here where you can go to Walmart and get about whatever you want, or you can just get on your laptop and get on Amazon and whatever you want, it'll be at your front door a day or two later. They have to wait in line on average about 5 hours for each thing they want. And it's not like everything's all in one store. You got to go to this little store for this and wait in line. You got to go to that little store for something else. I just can't imagine. Okay, the reason I know that, so getting into the second story, the reason I know that's what I was doing the night of January the 30th is because January the 31st is my most dreaded day of the year. That's when I have to pay my property taxes. And guess what day I choose to pay my property taxes? January the 31st. Why would I pay them sooner? Put it off. It's painful. I put it off as long as I can. Well, and my late wife, bless her heart, she always hated paying the property taxes too, and she's the one that always paid them until about 5 years ago when she was no longer able to do it. So I sit down. I go in about every year and protest the property taxes. I don't have a lot of properties, but I've got properties in 3 different counties. And a lot of those are in different taxing districts within that county. You know, one might be in the same county, but it's got a Kilgore College tax. Maybe the other one doesn't. It's just so confusing and just maddening, especially when I don't want to have to pay it anyway. And the money is so misused. Okay, so you kind of get a flavor for why I hate paying my taxes. Okay, but this time it was different because I sat down, I got everything spread out, all the bills, trying to make sense out of all of them. And I don't like having to pay it, but that is what it is. You know, Christ told us to pay, pay to Caesar what we owe. So yeah, I get that. But this year I had a little bit of an attitude adjustment. This year I always, historically, they pick up the mail in Gladewater out of the drop box at 4:30. I'm always trying to get there by 4:30 to drop it off because I've put it off as long as I can. This year I got there about 2 hours earlier. And I kind of enjoyed paying them this year after the exposure I had to the previous night to the conditions in Cuba. And I kept thinking, I don't like paying these taxes, but at least I don't live in Cuba. And the buildings aren't falling in when I go into town. And trash is not piled up all along the road. And we have roads, and we have city services, and I get more than $15 a month. So life is pretty good. So that, looking at it that way, it made it at least somewhat pleasant to pay my property taxes. So the title of the sermon, Think on These Things. Anybody know where that comes from in the Bible? Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. That's my core scripture. Let's turn to Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. And life was better when we look at it this way. We're going to start out in Philippians 4:4. Verse 4, it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand." And we need to ask ourselves, it's easy to read through these scriptures we've read for most or all of our lives and not think it through each little phrase. But if the Lord is at hand, why do we need to be anxious? We don't, if we're walking with Him and He's at hand. Verse 6, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Okay, and then verse 8, which is the core scripture. We're told, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things." So we're told to meditate on what's true, noble, just, pure, lovely, of a good report, of virtue, and that's praiseworthy. I'll give you a good example here I'm going to talk about my friend Randy Steele here in a little bit, who has stage 4 cancer, and he's on hospice and having it pretty rough. But do any of you know Jerry Holcomb? She normally attends United in Big Sandy. She's a really nice lady, and her and my wife were good friends. They both like to sing together, and they both love music. Well, Jerry, surprisingly, back here a few months ago, she ended up in the hospital and her kidneys were shutting down, and it looked iffy for a while whether or not she was going to make it. And then she was released from the hospital. She's still has challenges and has to be careful, but she went by the nursing home and visited my friend Randy, And she told Randy this beautiful analogy that she said she always liked to go whitewater rafting. And Jerry's, well, I'm not going to tell her age because I don't know her age, but she's a few years younger than me, and I'm pretty young, so she's pretty young. But Jerry said she always loved to go whitewater rafting, and she told Randy that right now God has her on a custom-made whitewater rafting trip, customized just for her. You know, if you're going down the river in a raft, you don't want to be down this boring river with no current, you're just floating. She liked the excitement of whitewater rafting, and that's the analogy that she drew to what she experienced being in the hospital and all the health problems she was having. And her point was, you know, if I just follow God, I don't have to worry about it because He's got it. Whatever happens, He's got this. But, you know, we live in a world that operates just the opposite. I used to get up every morning, I kind of hate to admit this, and while I was getting ready in the bathroom, we have a TV in the bathroom. While I was getting ready, I would watch Good Morning America, so I would know what's going on in the world today. And then we've got the 24-hour cycle of the news. I think CNN's the one that started it, but all day long, I mean, there's news all day long. Well, actually, it's mostly propaganda. And, you know, what we were talking about, these things we're supposed to think on, you know, whatsoever's of a good report. Apparently, the network news did not get the memo, because what they talk about is propaganda. They would talk all day long, 24/7, about everything that's going wrong. Well, there's good things that go right, that go on too, but that doesn't sell airtime. They talk about the bad things that are going on. So, you know, if we're not careful, we'll get caught in that trap where we wake up in the morning, we catch the news, see what's going on. I got to put the news in quotes. Then maybe you listen to it at noon, maybe before you go to bed, just to make sure you have nightmares or don't sleep well. Best thing to do is just turn that stuff off. Don't even listen to it. But, you know, we have a calling, and our calling is to be lights in this dark world. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 5, and we will read verses 14 and 15. Matthew 5, verse 14 and 15. Verse 14, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. So we're to be the light of the world. So you probably all have experienced this, hopefully not too often, but there's some people, if you're going to be around them or have dinner with them, I remember this from years past, and everybody sits down around the table and somebody throws out a negative, you know, something negative, and then everybody else just kind of feeds on that. And that's all you do talk about during dinner is all these negative things. Don't be a party to that. Be the light. Be the one that throws out a positive comment and builds people up, not tears people down. Every time we're around somebody, we should consciously make a habit out of lifting people up, whether we stop at a convenience store or at a tire shop or wherever it is. Whoever we interact with, we should make it a point to be a light to them and a positive influence. You know, whether it's a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, be a spreader of real good news. Let's think on the good and let's raise other people up. And the battle is right here in our mind. You know, we're all so incredibly blessed, even on the worst day of our life. On the worst day of my life was when I lost my wife. But I have to say that I could feel God's presence there, and I'm sure my wife could too. And that's I'll discuss a little more about that later. And when we're going through the worst time in our lives, It's then that we're sitting on the front row paying attention and looking for answers. And the bottom line is, when we're going through what seems like terrible trials, I'm totally convinced that when this life is all said and done, we will realize that those were our greatest blessings, because that's when we're looking to God for answers, and that's when we're moldable into His image, and that's what He's looking for. So if you're going through a sore trial, severe trial, thank God that He's doing His perfect work in you, because that's what's going on. When life really hurts, that's when our Father is perfecting us. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 2, and we'll read verses 9 through 11. Hebrews 2, 9 through 11. Hebrews 2, verse 9. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that He, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. Verse 10, for it was fitting for Him, for whom all things and by whom all things are made, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. Get that? Perfect through sufferings? For both He who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one, for which reason He is not ashamed to call them brethren. So He calls us brethren. Let's turn back now to Philippians chapter 4, and we're going to read verse 8 again, and then also verse 9. Verse 8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And then verse 9, the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. So as Paul said, verse 9, the things that you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do. That's our job too. That wasn't just Paul. It's our job for others to see, for us to see one another and others to see us doing the right thing, even when it hurts, even when we're suffering. And this gets me back to my friend Randy Steele. Randy grew up in the Worldwide Church of God, went to Ambassador College, and he's in the body of Christ. Him and his wife came to CGI once in a while, reasonably often, in Tyler. Okay, Randy, my wife and I and Randy and Diane, his wife, just met, it's been maybe 10 years ago. I've got friends that go back 40 and 50 years, so in comparison, Randy and Diane were pretty new friends. We met them because they came to the barn dance from there's those two words, barn dance. I'm hoping to be able to send out an update on the barn dance this week on the email. But Randy and Diane got the prize for who came the furthest that year. They came from Montana. And that's when Linda and I first met them. And then I think it's been about 9 years ago, maybe, they moved to the Big Sandy area. Okay, back it's been, I think, roughly 10 years ago, Randy and Diane lost their youngest son. About 7 years ago, Randy had open heart surgery. And Randy's 3 years younger than me. 2.5 years ago, Randy had to have, and Randy was here. Do any of you remember after my wife Linda died, Randy and another friend of mine came over here, came to Shreveport with me for church because I told them that I was always used to my wife coming with me. And I really appreciated that they volunteered to come with me. And so Randy was one. He sat right back here near where Mr. Woodard is, I think. Well, about 2.5 years ago, Randy had to have the lower part of his left leg amputated. In April of this year, Randy's wife of 44 years died. About 3 weeks later, Randy was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And he's in the nursing home there just 2 driveways down from my house now. And I would go see him about every day, but then he got to where, or text him. Normally I'd go over there every day, but now he's where he can't, he gets confused and is in a lot of pain. And so I didn't talk to him at all this week. His daughter texted me and said he'd been in a lot of pain and he was confused. But my point in all of this is through it all, through everything that Randy has been through, I have never once heard him complain. You know, losing your leg is bad enough. You know, that makes life really hard, but in everything, I have not heard him complain. What I have heard Randy say is, he's told me different times when he's reading his Bible, that it's just him and God sitting there and God's talking to him by what he reads in the Bible. So please keep Randy in your prayers. Somebody else I want to mention is Carl and Sharon Wilson. I think they were here 2 weeks ago today, was it? And 4 of us men try to have lunch about once a month. It's Wes White, myself. We've kind of started out with Wes and I, and then Steve Roberts, he joins us now, and now Carl Wilson joins us. We just all had lunch together Thursday. And by the way, Carl was telling me about coming over here. Did he play special music or not? Pardon? Oh, did he? Okay. Yeah. Well, Carl told me that today I should play special music on the piano, and I told him if I would if I felt inspired and moved. I obviously was not inspired and moved. I don't play the piano, so I did leave myself an out. But, you know, I really appreciate that Carl and Sharon found out in February that she has breast cancer, and Carl found out in June that he has stage 4 prostate cancer. I really respect that they both stay engaged to the degree that they're able to at this time, which is pretty much as always. You know, at some point in life, each of us will have to not be as engaged as what we used to be. But I really respect that they're both doing what they can to be engaged. I think I asked this question here before on on the same podcast. Is anybody familiar with the Rangan Chatterjee podcast? He's a doctor he's Indian descent, I think, and apparently he lives in England. I see his podcast every once in a while, and I ran across this fairly recently. He had a guest on his podcast. The lady's name is Dr. Gladys McGarry. I was going to print out her picture. It only printed out a part of her face, but she's 102 years old. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about her advice. She's often called the mother of holistic medicine. And she says health is not just physical. It involves mental, emotional, and spiritual elements in equal measure. And she says living a long and healthy life isn't about the right diet or taking vitamins and supplements. Instead, it requires a shift in perspective. A long life is all very well, but what are you living for? That's the important question. What are you living for? And then she goes on to say many people feel like, well, I'm so busy and I've got my job, I've got to get that taken care of, I've got to feed my family, raise my kids, I'm taking care of my elderly parents. I don't have time to think about that, what I'm living for. But her point is, you have to take time to realize figure out why you get out of bed every day. And probably all of you are familiar with Toby Keith. I used to think of Toby Keith, most of you probably know he died back, I think in the spring, back several months ago. And I always thought of Toby Keith as a kind of a wild guy living life on the edge. And one of his songs is actually my favorite song that he did. I don't remember the name of it, unless maybe it was How Do You Like Me Now? Any of you familiar with that song? He's talking about he had a girlfriend in high school. He wanted her to be his girlfriend. She wouldn't give him the time of day. He played the guitar and she wasn't interested in him. And then part of the song I really liked, that what he did, wrote her number on the football field. I don't like that, but anyway, he gets famous and popular, and he's on the radio all the time. So the part of the lyrics in this song is, "How do you like me now that I'm on your radio every morning when you wake up?" I thought it was a pretty cute song. But the reason I mentioned that is, I watched different interviews of Toby Keith after I found out he had cancer. And I really respected that he came to the point where he said, I'm not afraid of what lies in the future, because he trusted God. He said, I trust God, and therefore I'm not afraid of whatever's going to happen. And he had stomach cancer, which, from what I've studied up on, that's a pretty tough one. Any cancer is tough, but that's pretty painful from what I understand. So let's think about how incredibly blessed we are. We're all very blessed. Right now today, we're far more blessed than we ever dreamed of. Whether we're having a hard time paying the bills, lost our job, problems in relationships, health problems, severe health problems, terminal illness, worse yet, your mate terminally ill. Whatever it is, praise God that He's got this. All we have to do is walk with God with our little hand sticking up into His big giant hand, and He's got it, whatever comes along. And we should make a habit of being around old and elderly people. They have a lifetime of wisdom. We need to pick their brains. I look around when I say that, because more and more our crowd gets older. You got a younger crowd here than Tyler, it looks like. But try to be around people that are older than you and tap into their wisdom, because you might be surprised what you might learn, and it will be encouraging to them that someone cares. Another YouTube channel I watch from time to time is Dry Creek Wrangler School. Anybody familiar with it? Dwayne on Dry Creek Wrangler School. Him and his wife have a school that teaches, on a ranch, that teaches people how to ride a horse. And I'm not talking about, the little carousel at the fair and, your little kid rides a pony around and around. No, they're out on the ranch. They teach them how to ride horses. And I really like this guy, Dwayne. Him and his wife have 7 adult kids that they've raised. And he looks like an old cowboy type. He's probably not as old as he looks. I think he's in his 50s. He usually has a long beard, kind of a sometimes somewhat beat up cowboy hat. And he's almost always smoking a big cigar. I don't endorse the cigar part, but the guy has a lot of wisdom, and to me it's a lot like a good sermon a lot of times. But one of the comments he makes is, if you are the smartest person in the room, you need to find a smarter room, because you're not going to learn anything if you're the smartest guy in the room. And then he was telling too recently about, he was up in Alaska. He was a law enforcement officer back when he was in his 20s. And up there it's different. It's if he's going out to address a problem, he's going out into the boonies by himself, nobody but him and the person he's going to arrest or whatever's going to happen. So it's just him and his gun. No reinforcements are not coming. And then when he was 38, he decided to go back to the police academy and get re-registered. So he did, and he had 3 young men in their 20s that they all roomed together. Well, the guys in their 20s, they took the test after going to the school. It was probably a week or so, whatever it was. They all 3 failed the test. And they were all really upset about it. So Dwayne told them, don't worry about it. The test was designed to be failed. The real test is, how do you move forward, and what are you going to do once you failed the test? That's the real test. And I think there's a good analogy for us in life like that. You know, Jesus Christ endured everything. We're supposed to count it all joy when we go through various trials or temptations. Let's turn to James chapter 1. We'll read verses 2 through 5. James 1, verses 2 through 5. Verse 2. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this here before, but I think it's worth mentioning. When my wife was terminally ill, our holistic doctor suggested that we both have a glass of red wine every evening and some dark chocolate. So every evening, I would get 2 wine glasses, fill them up with red wine, get 2 pieces of dark chocolate, and go sit down with my wife. And every evening, I would make a toast. And the toast was to the good old days. This day, today, because today is the good old days. Now, I realized then that my wife was dying, and that I'd better appreciate having her while I had her, not look back 20 years and realize, well, that was the good old days, and I didn't even realize it. And though I don't still have my wife, I have my kids, my son-in-law, my daughter-in-law, my grandkids, lots of friends. These are still the good old days. I really miss my wife a lot, but we need to realize every day we wake up and live that this is one of the good old days. And it occurred to me that no matter what we're going through, God gives us at least 2 safety nets, 2 that I'm going to mention, and I'm sure a whole lot more than that. The two that I want to mention is, no matter what we're going through, again, if we're walking with God, we've got our little hand up in his hand. No matter what comes along, he's got it, and he's there. He's present with us. And he's right there beside us. That's one safety net. And let's turn to one of my favorite scriptures, and we'll read about the other safety net. God's timing is different than what our timing is. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 21, and we'll read verse 4. Revelation 21:4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. In God's perfect timing, he will make all things good again. So we need to fear not. Referring back to Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, it's significant that the Apostle Paul used the word if. If there is any excellence, He was saying you have to look for the good in your spouse, your children, your workplace, and in that difficulty you're facing. It's easy to focus on the flaws, on our loved ones, our mates, and it's easy to look at the things that discourage us. But how often do we get so focused on our challenges that we fail to recognize how God has been there for us all along? Maybe we were wanting this and this and this, and we tend to even not notice or forget that, well, along the way, God gave us this and this and this, and actually that was more helpful than this would have been. So we get caught up in our stress and forget to realize how God has sustained us and given us favor all along. You know, the people in our lives may not be perfect, but a little tip, we're not either. None of us are perfect. Other people put up with things from us that they would rather not have to put up with. So, you know, we tend to be more generous and forgiving of ourselves than we are of others when we're looking at what others might have said or might have done. Or I did something stupid this week that I need to email one of my friends and apologize for. I just meant it as fun, but you know, we all do stupid things from time to time without meaning to be hurtful. So when you have a problem, let's do our part, and then let's turn it over to God. And back here, it's been about 15 years ago, we were going through something, and it was just not between my wife and I, but between my wife and I and some others. And I tried to do everything I could to fix the situation. And it was like, if you've ever been fishing, you've got this big ball of a mess of fishing line, and it's all tangled up. And the more you try to straighten it out, the more tangled it gets. It was like that. So I would figuratively, in my mind, I'd take this big ball of mess of fishing line, I'd put it in this box, and I'd hand it to God and ask him to fix it. Then before I knew it, I'd be reaching back up in the box, trying to straighten it out, making a bigger mess out of it. But the point is for us to do our part when there's a situation that needs to be resolved, to do our part and then hand it over to God. You know, Christ said, I am. He has what we need. Whatever we need, that's what he is. So if we think on these things and walk with God, he has whatever you need. If we think on what's true, what's honest, what's just, what's pure, what's lovely, what's of a good report, what's virtuous, and what's praiseworthy. And I read a brief description about meditating on these things, and the way they described it was, it's like you have this blessing, now take it that you're aware of. Now take it all apart, then put it back together and reassemble it, so you realize just what a huge blessing it is. In Mark 12, verses 29 through 31, it says, Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all of your mind, and with all your strength. And on the subject, it's, you know, if we do that, we're going to be closer to God. This is the first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So, you know, sometimes, and I do this, I'll have a negative thought, and then that'll kind of lead to the next negative thought. And then before you know it, your mind's going in this circle, on this loop, just replaying these negative things over and over. Don't do that. When I realize I'm doing that, I'm like, no, that does not get space in my head. I'm going to think about these positive thoughts. And it's helpful to start praying and showing God gratitude for the positive things. So we don't want to allow that loop to play over and over. I refer back to Jerry Holcomb's custom whitewater rafting trip. Walk with God and realize that, I remember, when Lynn and I took the church teens from the Big Sandy area on church teen trips, different years. One year we went to the Ocoee River in eastern Tennessee. We went whitewater rafting. Another year on the Snake River in near Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Down the Colorado River north of the Grand Canyon one time. But like on the Ocoee River, they had these nasty rapids. One I remember was called Table Saw Rapids. Like, here's the river, and here's this jagged rock sticking up like this, it's like you're on a table saw. But when you consider that God is the one that has orchestrated this whitewater rafting trip for us, it's all for our own good, unless we're just making stupid, dumb mistakes. That's a whole nother subject. We don't want to make stupid, dumb mistakes. We all do sometimes, but we want to avoid that. So, if we do these things, we will have the peace of God. And if we think on these things, we can have that peace. God is the God of peace, and we can have that peace if we think on these things.